So you want to start a flower farm, but you think the idea is too far out of reach for you. Well, can I let you in on a little secret? I almost never got started growing flowers myself. You see, there was a time when this dream of growing and selling cut flowers, well, it felt too big for me. And the biggest thing in my way was the fact that I felt like I didn't have any of the necessary resources to really get started. Back when Two Sisters Flower Farm was just this pipe dream, I didn't have a flower cooler, a heated greenhouse, or any sort of professional grow space. I didn't even own any land, which felt like a necessary component to any flower farm. And while I certainly had enthusiasm, I also lacked the knowledge of how to grow and care for flowers. Now for me, the final nail in the coffin was the fact that I didn't have a lot of money to invest either to really get started and get my dream up and running. I mean, flower farming just sounded expensive. Back then, I didn't have a clue of how much things really cost, but I kept thinking that things like bulbs and irrigation and landscape fabric, well, none of that sounded cheap. And so for a little while, I allowed myself to believe in the narrative that flower farming was something that I'd pursue someday. You know, someday in the future when I had more resources and more money to get started. Now at the end of this video, I'm going to share with you why I feel like not having adequate resources was the biggest blessing ever. So I hope you stay tuned for that. But in this moment, I want to fast forward to today because it feels like this sort of ironic full circle moment. You see, I feel like in the last few years, I feel like I have built a somewhat successful small scale flower farm. And the funniest part about it to me is how still, even to this day, I don't own any of those resources I just mentioned just a moment ago. Resources that I felt were a prerequisite to being a flower farmer. Now I feel like my story is not unique because every month I talk with aspiring flower farmers through our online consults, and I talk with other beginning growers both online and off, and the consensus always seems to be the same. These are the individuals who would love to take their passion for growing beautiful flowers and turn it into a side hustle that actually provides additional income for their family or for themselves, but getting started feels impossible. I mean, for a lot of us, it can feel downright scary investing money into something when you're not sure if it will make you any sort of return on it. And that's why in this video, I wanted to talk more about the investments that I made to get my flower farm started. And more specifically, I wanted to share which of those investments I felt had the greatest impact in helping me go from part-time flower grower to full-time flower farmer. Trust me, none of them are what you think. So if you're wanting to know more, let's get to it. So if I'm being honest, I wasted a lot of money early on in my flower farming journey. I either bought things that I found out later that I just didn't need, or I had to buy more of the things that I did need as my flower growing skills weren't exactly up to par. Yes, I killed a lot of flowers in my early days. Now I think this is a normal part of business because none of us really know what we're doing when we're just getting started. Very few people hit it out of the park their very first try, and so I'm not discouraged by the money that I quote unquote lost. If anything, the great thing about this YouTube channel is that I get to look back on those mistakes which I made early on, and I get to share that experience with you so that hopefully you're able to reach your goals with a little less frustration. So let's start with the obvious question. Why exactly am I so adamant that you don't need a lot of resources or expensive infrastructure to get started? The plain and simple truth is that having the best tools and equipment at your disposal, I'm not denying that it can be incredibly helpful. After all, anything that improves the efficiency of how you're able to grow flowers, well, that can help you scale the number of flowers that you're able to grow. But I know for me, growing more flowers, especially when we're talking about those early days, that wasn't what I needed in order to grow my business. I think a lot of us have to get it out of our head that it's the biggest flower farms that are the most successful. As I've shared in other recent videos, whether you have a hobby or a business has very little to do with the size of your farm and more to do with your numbers. Most beginning flower farmers that I know, and this has included me too, have too much supply and not nearly enough demand when it comes to their flowers. We get stuck in this mindset that just because we're growing a beautiful product, that flowers will practically sell themselves. It's the whole mentality of, if I build it, they will come. And what most of us find is that when we finally do have flowers ready to sell, and we put out the word on social media that we have bouquets available, we expect this rush of customers who will want to scoop up our beautiful, sustainably grown flowers, and instead, what a lot of us get are crickets. And so growing more isn't what's going to put your business in the black. In fact, growing more and taking on the additional expense, it may actually push you further in the red. And this is why some of the best investments that I made early on were things that helped me increase my customer base. Now, one of those investments that really helped move the needle for me was having professional photos taken. Now, in full transparency, this wasn't a strategic decision at first. The main reason that I chose to hire a photographer was because I had very few nice photos of me and my sister together in one photo. As our farm name implies, Two Sisters Flower Farm, there are in fact two of us sisters that are a part of this business. I was tired of trying to Photoshop the two of us together into one photo so that I could use it on our website or for promotional materials. And so I hired a photographer to come and take photos of us in our garden at the tail end of our season when the garden was really full. Now, I really wrestled with this decision because as a new and small business, I was barely making any money, and I just felt like I couldn't justify the added expense of professional photos. I felt like I couldn't afford it. And if this is you right now, I completely understand the hesitation. But here's why I feel like this was such a pivotal thing for us. Having professional photos that we can use on our website or share on social media, well, it has helped strengthen the first impression a potential customer has of us in our business. In a world where we're inundated with so much information, it can be sort of hard, especially as a new business, to break through the noise and capture someone's attention. But those professional photos have really helped us to put our best foot forward so that people are willing to give us a moment of their time to really learn more about who we are or what our brand is about. What's more, those photos help to visually tell our story so that we can build trust and, deeper connection with others. I believe that building a personal connection with your audience is one of the most important things that you can do to grow your business. Because remember, the people who spend money on your flowers, they're not just buying what you're selling, they're buying into what you do and who you are and why you do what you do. And photos are a great way of communicating all of that. It's what sets you apart from the 6 other flower farms that are selling similar flower bouquets, just down the road from you. Now, all of this being said, is every photo that I share online something that was captured by a professional photographer? Well, no. Sometimes you just have to be able to capture a photo quickly and in the moment. That's why next week I plan on sharing tricks that I've learned over the years so you're able to take better pictures of your flowers simply with your phone. So this is your reminder to hit that subscribe button below if you haven't already so that you're notified of when that video goes live. Now, this next investment will be a little different for everyone, but I think one of the reasons that we believe so much in this idea that we need a greenhouse or a high tunnel or some sort of infrastructure to get started is because it makes us feel like more of a legitimate business. Imposter syndrome is normal. It's something a lot of us experience. And to sort of combat this, I think it's nice to have something that we can point to that says, hey, look, I'm a flower farmer. Here's your proof. But I do think that there are other ways to overcome these thoughts, that have us feeling like, who are we for thinking that we could actually be a flower farmer? For me, one of the investments that I made before I really felt ready was hiring an accountant to help me with the financial side of my business. When I say that I didn't feel ready, I mean it. I remember walking into this woman's office with chicken scratch, smeared across my handwritten spreadsheets, and I was hardly making any money at the time. Now, thankfully, this woman was the kindest human ever, and she never judged me for being at that starting point. And obviously, after it was all done, it was such a relief to get the financial components of my business in order. But more importantly, I remember walking out of that appointment feeling less afraid of the financial side of what I was doing. There was a part of me that was no longer afraid to grow my business because I felt like I could handle that growth if and when it ever showed up. The lesson I learned in all this was that doing the same things that I was doing was only going to keep me small. If I wanted my business to grow and to be taken seriously, I had to take those steps a real business would take, even if in the moment I didn't feel like a real business. This is why I can't encourage you enough to seek professional advice and get the proper support around parts of your business that you're the least sure about. More often than not, it will put you in the right mindset so that you're able to level up on the things that you're doing. So sort of along those same lines as professional help, I think education, with one simple exception that I will mention here shortly, I think it's worth investing in so that you're able to grow your business more quickly than trying to do it on your own. Now, I'm a firm believer that anything and everything that you want to do, you can absolutely figure it out on your own. But what you save from not investing in an online course or an in-person workshop, it's often less than what you ultimately end up paying in time as you trial and error your way through things. Now, it's taken me a while to really sort of switch my mindset around investing in education. And even now, I still feel the hesitation sometimes when I'm signing up for an online course that has a higher price tag attached to it. But learning from someone who's willing to share their experience doing whatever it is that you want to do, that saves you the time of having to figure it out on your own. And if we're really honest with ourselves, money is a renewable resource. Time, however, is not. And I will say that I think investing in any sort of education, it goes beyond just expanding your skill set. I think it's a really powerful thing when you're willing to invest in yourself. I know for me, making an investment into me directly, not just into my business, it gives me the reassurance that I'm in control and that no matter what happens, I'm able to handle whatever comes my way because I'm the thing that's driving the business. The business didn't just happen. But here's a stipulation I want to mention. I think you have to be careful because education, when you lean on it too much, it can be a form of procrastination for some business owners. There always comes a point where you just have to roll up your sleeves and get to work. You can't keep taking in more and more information because you simply don't feel ready. Education is only meant to give you the self-confidence to take that first step toward your goal. And what you get back in return from taking that first step is feedback and clarity as to what your second and third steps ought to be. I want to reiterate that education on its own, it won't solve your problems. You need to use education in conjunction with action to really get the most out of this investment. Now, if you're looking for a low-cost investment to increase your flower farming knowledge, I've listed some of my favorite flower farming books in a blog post on my website, and I'll link that in the description box below. I'll also be sharing a video here on this channel in the near future on my favorite flower farming courses that I've taken over the years and what I look for when it comes to online courses. So again, this is your reminder, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button below. Now, I couldn't record a video like this without mentioning at least one flower input. I mean, flowers are right there in the name, flower farming. And so it makes sense that they'd carry some importance. Though in fairness, providing flowers, it doesn't have to be the only value that you provide to your customers. I want to encourage you to think outside of the box, and that's why in this previous video here, I shared a few ways of growing your flower farming business without growing more flowers. I'll link it below in case you'd like to check that out after watching this video. But back to this video. As I've already mentioned, it takes time to build a customer base. And for those of us entering into this space without flower growing experience, it can also take time to improve your flower growing skills. I know how tempting it can be to want to grow the showiest flowers. I mean, who wants to grow the basic sort of standard cut flower varieties like sunflowers and zinnias when there's much more exciting things out there like ranunculus or peonies or garden roses? I mean, it's normal to want to give up the boring, somewhat basic flowers for something that carries a little bit more novelty. But I know from experience, one of the best investments that I made during my early years of flower farming was investing in fast-growing annuals that I could grow from seed. This worked well for me for two reasons. For starters, I knew that I wanted to start this adventure of growing flowers. I wanted to do it debt-free. And as someone that didn't have a lot of extra money laying around to get started, seeds were my best option. Most annuals can be sown directly into the ground, which can lessen your expense too, as it eliminates the need for seed starting equipment. With fast-growing annuals, you're able to have blooms that very first season, which meant for me that I could bring in money relatively fast. I wasn't having to wait years to recoup the little money that I had spent. When you're starting a business, sometimes you just need those quick wins that you're able to build momentum and really get the ball rolling. And the second reason why seeds were such a beneficial investment in my situation is because I tend to be risk adverse. I'm not that go big or go home type person. I like to sort of get a feel for what I'm getting into. Knowing this about myself, I knew that I didn't want to stomach the risk that can come from investing in higher dollar crops, at least not right away. I mean, take tulips for example. One tulip bulb may cost you anywhere from 30 cents upwards to $1 or more. You mess up with tulips and you lose out on more money than had you invested in something like sunflower seeds, which costs more like a penny or two per seed. Looking back, I'm glad that I allowed myself time to hone in my growing skills by focusing first on warm season annuals. I love how it allowed me to test the waters, to get a feel for what my customers liked, to understand what sort of bouquet combinations that I liked, and to get a full understanding of the actual floral ingredients that I'd actually need as my business grew. I especially loved how my garden felt like a fresh blank slate each year, because it meant that I never felt locked into something. I could easily switch the color palette of the flowers that I was growing, or I could try new and funky varieties. Now, as we get more seasoned at growing flowers, I definitely see the importance of growing perennials, and we are taking steps to include more perennials on our farm. But for me, perennials were not that starting point that I needed. For me, it was a slow build to get to this point. Now, so far in this video, I've talked about the best investments I made for my flower farming business, given my limited resources. And the question that begs to be asked is, given what I know now, would I choose to invest my money differently had I had more of it in the beginning? And the surprising answer is no. As I said at the start of this video, one of the biggest blessings was the fact that I had limited resources, because that constraint forced me to get creative with how I solved the various problems that I encountered. I'll be honest, had I had access to a greenhouse, or had I been willing to go into debt my very first year of growing flowers, I likely would have never started growing pumpkins. You see, my original vision for what I wanted to do was I wanted to grow flowers year-round. In Michigan, with our rather short frost-free growing season, that felt difficult. And rather than allow myself to feel defeated, I had this aha moment. I realized I could continue selling product even after the first frost wiped out my tender annuals if I grew pumpkins. Now, pumpkins don't necessarily grow in the cold, but they have an amazingly long shelf life, which means that I could sell to my customers well up until Halloween. Growing tulips in bulb crates, like I shared in this video here, was another one of those sort of pivots due to the fact that I didn't own a flower cooler. I've always enjoyed tulips, and I knew that at some point I wanted to grow them on a large scale. However, I was fully aware of how Mother Nature works, and despite tulips having, early, mid, or late season blooming windows, I knew that it was going to be difficult to field grow tulips and to move all of those stems to customers at once without some sort of cold holding space. And so rather than plant different tulip varieties and pray that there would be enough time between when those early season tulips started blooming and when the late season buds started to open, instead I took a different approach, and I planted our tulip bulbs in crates so that I could force the bulbs over a much longer window of time, from Valentine's Day all the way up to Mother's Day. By doing this, I had more control over the number of stems that were blooming at a time, and by blooming just what I needed for my customers, I could move the stems without having to store them in a cooler. I can't encourage you enough to embrace the challenges that you face as you build the flower farm of your dreams. Constraints don't have to be restricting. In fact, they can be extremely advantageous, because when you learn to work with what you have, you often find a solution that you hadn't considered before. Now, it's your turn. I want to hear from you. What is one unexpected investment that you made in your business that was more beneficial than you had originally anticipated? Let me know by sharing your story in the comments below. Let me just say thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you are interested in learning more about starting a flower farm, you're going to want to check out this next video where I share easy ways to grow your flower farming business without growing more flowers. I'll link it on the end screen here. Can't wait to see you there. Bye guys.